All right, testing for audio. Testing for audio. That's good. All right, let's have everybody mute microphones, please.
Marty, you're muted.
Thank you. Try that again. Hello, and welcome to the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum, episode number 34, where we discuss all matters relating to the challenges and opportunities of live streaming worship services and other events for any faith. Whether your congregants tune in for community, your message, or your music, the higher the quality of your presentation, the higher the level of engagement that you offer them, the longer your viewers and your congregants will stay, and the more often that they will return. If you're with us live, you are an important part of the show. Your questions and comments help to produce the show and steer the topics that we discuss. If you're with us live on YouTube, get a portable device ready for a QR code that I'm going to put up in a moment. It'll be important. Now, there are several ways that you can engage with us here on the show and with each other to contribute. The first is by asking questions. You can write them in Mukana, where you can also comment and chat with panelists and with each other. And there's a link in the Zoom chat tool right now, so go ahead and open that up and get into Mukana, which is where we do our Q&A. And here is a QR code for your that you can scan with a phone or a tablet that'll get you to Mukana on your portable device. The second way that you can engage is with in our Discord. Now, Discord is our private, topic-driven resource and discussion platform. On it, you'll find a wealth of technical information and information on the show, upcoming and past topics, and links to see to our YouTube page, and links to all kinds of information. And you can ask questions, and you can engage with each other and with our co-hosts. So if you're stuck on a problem, you have a question, you need answers, you need some help with something, or you just want to chat, you can do that in our Discord all week long. If you're with us live on Zoom, you can stick around after we're done and participate in our post show, where we'll have a casual conversation with open microphones. And also, if you'd like to participate on our panel, maybe you can offer a different perspective or experience, just get here 30 minutes or so before the show time and we'll check you in. So we are one in a related set of communities that our panelists and I contribute to, dedicated to all flavors of media production. These are like examples are Office Hours, the Zoom Test Kitchen, AV Tech Talks, and the Synagogue Tech Forum, which is our sister program on alternate Thursdays. And I see that there are people here, like Leo Mindell, the host. And maybe you can tell us what you might have going on for next week.
I can't remember. Sorry, I've been in a bit late. The next week I can give me 2 seconds and I can actually tell you what the next week is.
Sure.
Yeah, I can. So next week we're featuring Rabbi Lauren Berman, who's creative and cutting edge use of Safari, which is an online learning site that people use to find information for their sermons for all religions, but predominantly around things that are related to the Old Testament and Hebrew.
Well, that ought to be a good one. That'd be very interesting. So a biblical scholar relating to current worship, right?
It gives you the ability to look up any verse in the Bible and other books and compare notes and see how to use it and how it is in different languages, including English and Hebrew. So it's quite an interesting resource. It's a massive resource that is used.
It is. I was looking at that last week after somebody had mentioned it, and it's really quite the thing. So there's an example. If you're hungry to learn more about media production, about worship, for various faiths, on this show we cater to multiple faiths, interfaith. The synagogue show is primarily for Jewish faith, but we're mostly talking about technology and how we can apply it to make worship more effective for those who are tuning in. So if you're hungry to learn more, look in Discord under related shows, and those are all listed there. So media production, even for worship, that's a rich and deep area of interest and continuing study. One of the things we talk about is that when we are doing media production, we might set up a system, but we're never done setting up that system. We're always looking to improve things, to improve the way that we use equipment, our learning about equipment. Maybe you've figured out one way to accomplish a task, and then you find that there are multiple ways that you could do that, and that might improve your results, improve your satisfaction with it, make your work more interesting. There's 20 ways to skin this cat. And some of that is what we're going to be talking about today. Now I typically run an audio training class on Monday afternoons. We're going to skip that for the next 2 weeks because I'm going to be booked on a job. So I'm not going to be able to do that. So today, over the last 6 months to a year, many of you, right, you have created brand new video production and streaming systems. You've installed cameras, you've upgraded your lighting, your audio, you've formalized your new workflows to put these streams together. You may have new volunteer or staff crew. Hopefully you've strengthened your working relationship between your tech people, your ministry, and your staff. And I really wanted to offer all of you some time to share some of your accomplishments, things that within your group and talk about the things that you're looking forward to improving in the coming year. So in the first half, we're gonna look back and see and celebrate all of the accomplishments that you've made, some small, some large, and then we'll look about where you're going to go to next. So who would like to start off? And this can go out to anybody who's watching. Raise your digital hand if you want to share, and we'll be happy to bring you in. So I see Till. Go ahead.
Just had to unmute myself there. Hope everybody can hear me. We are currently, actually since COVID, we've been doing Zoom services. And we're now getting into the hybrid service space. Currently in the church, I'm with All Souls UU Church in Watertown, New York, in case anybody's interested. So we do hybrid services now, and we're pretty much in the sanctuary. We're just using, cheapo Tech webcams. I'm really a Logitech guy, but we're looking to up the ante, up the game on this. And so we started by trying with the Mevo multicam situation. The problem with Mevo and the multicams is that in order to run multiple cameras, they all have to be changed to, first of all, you have to have an RTMP server or change the cameras to NDI. Mevo's multicam app will not support NDI. So that prohibits one from using OBS or anything like that to get to Zoom. And so it gets to be very, very complicated. We're now looking at another option, which is, and I'm a Logitech kind of guy. There's the Logitech PTZ Pro 2 camera, which is it's a plug and play. It has mechanical pan capabilities, 260 degrees. The camera itself with the Zeiss optics has a 90-degree field of view. So we're really looking at using that and being able to get onto our Zoom platform with that. Unfortunately, the Mevo is really a streaming only device, unless you go through a lot of very complicated reset of the device and software and all that. And so we're looking at the Logitech as being the option for being able to Zoom the different parts of the congregation, the sanctuary, the different activities going on during a service, and make it easy for a volunteer to get like a half hour's training to be able to run the camera during a service without having an IT guy there. So I don't know if anyone here has any experience with that. The webcams work, but it's a mediocre solution if you're going to go true hybrid and have really decent quality for that. So if anybody has any information or experience with the Logitech PTZ Pro 2, that'd be great to hear. I'm working directly with Logitech on it and also Unified Communications, which is one of their verified resellers. And so far the support's been really great. So I'll leave it at that. That's where we're at. And like I said, we're looking to launch forward into the next level of hybrid services, which we will continue to do even after this whole COVID thing is behind us, because it's a way of reaching. We have members that have left and, are different parts of the country and world. And of course, we want them to be involved. And we see it as a way, we're a very small church now. And we've been, getting smaller and smaller. And we're looking at the hybrid as a way of reaching out and growing our membership. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Oh, certainly, certainly. So the Logitech PTZ Pro 2, I see is a 1080p PTZ camera. Not really familiar with the specific features of this one. It's got USB, I see, and does it have, is it primarily a webcam? Is it a USB camera only?
Yeah, we've tried one, and I can speak to that when you're ready.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I picked up, I'm pretty sure it's a PTZ Pro and not the original PTZ. I got a used one cheap to try. Partly it didn't, somebody was selling it cheaply because it didn't have the power supply with it. So I picked up the power supply. It didn't cost us much. Yet I've not been really impressed with Logitech in the respect that their own software for it is really crummy. It's like it's a 5 or 7 year old app, and the left and right pan and up and down are backwards of what you'd think they would be intuitively, and there doesn't seem to be any way to flip it. I'm on a Logitech webcam that I attach to my laptop right now. It's a 922 or something. I like a lot of their products. I wasn't really impressed with the software. The camera itself, I've had a little bit of trouble with it being sticky, but it may be that we've got a junky unit. It's sort of not sticky, but it sort of hesitates and moves strangely sometimes. The biggest issue you're dealing with there is it's a USB camera. And so you're used to limited to USB lengths of whatever that is, 15 or 20 feet, unless you use an extender. It's very hard to find good advice on which extenders work. There's a big vendor of PTZ cameras. I think they're just PTZ. And I bored into their website, and they made some recommendations, but said, you can't count on anything to work, and we're not promising anything. I did buy their most expensive, though not outrageous, suggested option. And I've got like a 40-foot cable that does in fact work. But the other thing that I haven't tested out yet is whether or not, given that it's USB, whether OBS or vMix can control it. I don't know that. So I'm really looking at probably due to the problems we've had, there's a whole question right now I may bring up later as to what our congregation is going to do going forward. But I'd be looking at getting a Ethernet based camera that you would know would be supported by the major applications. Then you don't have any of those distance issues. And actually, one of my questions is I'm trying to remember, but like two or three sessions back, there was a congregation in Mexico that had it was, I think, sort of a knockoff of those expensive PTZ cameras that seemed to work exactly the same and was working for them. And I'm curious what those were.
That's interesting what you say. What we're trying to get away from is having to use OBS or any of those type of applications.
Mm-hmm.
What I found with my discussions with Logitech is that the PTZ Pro 2, that it just acts as a webcam when you plug it in USB.
Mm-hmm.
And in our sanctuary, the 10-foot distance would work fine because the camera has a 260-degree mechanical pan. And that way the camera is plugged in just like a webcam into the laptop. And there's no additional software you need to operate the pan, tilt, or zoom. you just use the remote control, just like a TV remote, and zoom it and pan it and tilt it mechanically from that. I have
Okay,
heard
so I'll let me just jump in here. Um, After we get through the intended program for the day, which is talking about accomplishments and then looking forward, we can go into a general discussion, and then we can also use the after show to look at this camera and see if it really fits your application. We can talk about the size of your congregation, the size of your room, the style of your service, and see if this is really a good fit for you.
Great.
So we'll come back to that, right?
Awesome.
Okay, great.
And I'll stick around for all of that.
I appreciate that. That would be great. Who else would like to share? Who's next? So we've done a lot I'm sure everybody has done a lot over the last year, come a long way. You've created all these new systems, and you're doing live services or improving your virtual services. Tell us about it. Let's celebrate what you've done, because you certainly deserve it.
Well, let me go ahead and chip in since I kind of got started here. I'm trying to think. I started buying equipment, almost after we were first forced to Zoom, tested a few things in the sanctuary. We didn't go back to the sanctuary until this summer. We've got a relatively small congregation, a relatively large sanctuary that's about 45 feet deep and 45 feet wide. I set up the PTZ webcam, a fixed computer, and a connection to our soundboard. On the one hand, I thought that was working pretty well. And on the other hand, there was constant pressure to do more and, to have somebody reading off the chat when remote participants had questions or joys and sorrows to share. And then they wanted to drive a big screen TV. And also our music committee collapsed. Our live musicians went away. And so we had recorded music. When we were doing Zoom, when we were all Zoom, we were used to playing YouTube, which videos with, and starting to be able to consistently get ones that had the words to the song, which was really handy. And that worked great then. But then when we're in the sanctuary, you've sort of got a split audio feed between the sanctuary. And it was really just me trying to handle it. And we ended up, dragging in multiple laptops. And we had, we're over in Western Vermont. We had one guy who was very dedicated to his Mac laptop that had a broken keyboard. So it had a keyboard plugged into it, and did something, every other time we had some sort of trouble with that thing. And unfortunately, our system, I think the core system, pulling audio off the soundboard, putting it into the fixed computer, which was all set up for high quality audio, and then pulling in the webcam worked pretty well. We use the webcam. I've got a couple of presets on it. So we mostly use presets, but I keep getting, things change a little bit from time to time. And even in chat, I'll get requests from people to zoom in on something different or change things a little bit. So there is some desire for some flexibility. And then you run into the fact that even on the remote, the Logitech controls are backwards. You hit the button that goes to the right and the view pans to the left and vice versa. But we ended up just having a lot of trouble trying to manage it. And I feel like we're making good progress. And actually got in a little, after last week, last time I got in a little Stream Deck to try, which I'm looking forward to. But this congregation is thinking of kind of practically abandoning its efforts. And I'm actually considering looking for another congregation nearby that's a little bit more ambitious and better resourced. So it's a mixed bag for us at this point.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I can see that budget, plays a significant role in choices that are made. But we talk a lot here about the fact that, and research has shown. In fact, I just saw several papers from a company that specializes in online church giving platforms, who did a bunch of surveys and collected a bunch of data and found that people are enjoying online services even more than they were enjoying, in some ways, even more than they were enjoying in-person services, because people are more consistently watching online services than they went to church or synagogue before. They're just watching more consistently, and they're giving more. But it takes work to get to the point where you have a presentation that people want to watch, that makes them feel engaged, that makes them feel connected. And for the worship leaders to feel comfortable in front of a camera to be able to deliver that kind of presentation. Right? So there's a lot to continue. At the beginning of this series of shows, we stressed very strongly that every congregation, every leadership needs to determine what their mission is and what their goals are, and think really hard about the future of worship, considering the uncertainties of COVID and any other sort of pandemic, endemic calamities that may keep us from congregating in person again. It's so uncertain. You've got to have a backup plan. Well, good. Thank you, JP, for sharing that. And good luck. Matt Alspa, hi.
Hi. I just actually your lead in was kind of nice, Marty, about the effect of having well, I'll call it good hybrid or multi-platform services and its effect on stewardship. We just completed our stewardship campaign, and our goal was 750,000 pesos, which is something like $37,000. Not big. We're not a big congregation, but the result was a good bit over 900,000 pesos. Unexpected and surprising, and I think a big part of that is coming from the fact that people feel connected, even though they're not all physically present, and even though people are feeling a little bit more skittish these days about coming out in person, even as we continue to meet. That wasn't really the thing I wanted to kind of hold up as one of our accomplishments, or one of the things that I'm proud of for this congregation. And by the way, we are the congregation in Mexico that was featured in the early December show. You can go back and look at it on YouTube. But the thing that I wanted to hold up that I'm really proud of is we've got a guy in the congregation who, really quiet, really low key, but I would almost call him the volunteer whisperer, because we now have, I think, a full baker's dozen of people who are volunteering to help out in some way on the tech on our Sundays. And as a consequence, we've been able to spread the work out and introduce people into it in a much more managed way, so they're not stressed out trying to do too many things at once. It is a goal of ours to automate more and more of that stuff, but right now, we've been able to achieve a kind of a balance there where people are not working every week, and they're working as much or as little as they want and doing jobs that they're comfortable with. And I think enjoying the whole experience. There's a lot of folks in congregations, and this is a congregation of just a little over 100 people. But there are a lot of folks that want to be involved in the Sunday morning thing, but they don't want to be up front. And we figured out that the tech is one place where, I'm going to admit it, a lot of our older guys like to plug in. So that's what I'm holding up as one of our success stories.
Oh, that's great. Wow. That's really good news. Congratulations. That's well deserved. So yeah, as Matt mentioned, he's from a very small congregation in Mexico, and they were the winners of our very first of our contest that we ran early in the series of shows. It was for a consultation, a needs assessment consultation. And we went through a lot of information about all of the equipment they had, and they already had quite a bit of information. I think they really jumped the gun and started doing things right off the bat that were very impressive. And we talked about what their goals were and their, what their expectations were for streaming services live at, when that was possible, and how that would integrate with their ministry and their style of worship. And they've made big improvements. And as you mentioned, in the early part of December, we visited them back again on the show to see what their progress was, and it was quite impressive. So you just kind of proved the point that research showed that when you do a really good online service, people get more engaged, and they're even giving more. They're not giving less. They're actually giving more. So that's really important and good to know. Okay, thank you so much for that. Who is next? I saw there were other hands. Bruce McNair from Connecticut. Hi there.
Good evening, everyone. I not only work with Marty on these Thursday evening things, but I'm a part of that Monday audio training session that Marty has taken over the last few months, and we are extremely grateful for all of the advice and the support that we've gotten. But basically, I guess my story for tonight is really kind of looking back over the arc of the last 18 months and the evolution, how far we've come, the various phases along the way. That basically when COVID hit and the world just stopped, nothing happened for a little while. And then we went to what I'll call phase one, which was basically an employee of the church who has quite a background in photography and video editing, started to do full recorded services. So he would get together Thursday and Friday, and the sermon and the choir and whatever else was going on, he would record them, I think at that point, on his Nikon digital SLR with a little USB snowball mic that just picked up everything in the room. But then would spend Friday and Saturday getting that all edited into place. And a couple of us at that point would download this 4 or 5 gig file Saturday evening, and we would just get on Zoom on Sunday morning and roll the tape. So we had this total pre-recorded static broadcast, and that was our first dive into the virtual world back in the early days of COVID. And it worked, but it was a lot of work to get it all edited, and it lost a lot of the kind of the spontaneity of a real live show. So within, I don't know, after a number of months of that, I'll say we moved on to phase two, which was still nobody in the sanctuary except for the participants, but we actually started to do the live broadcasts out of the sanctuary. And for that, we really did a significant tech upgrade. in terms of getting a couple of proper video cameras. We've got a couple of PTZ optics, pen tilt zoom cameras. They're nice NDI cameras out in a couple of different places in the sanctuary, coming around to a hub through the Cat5 cables. We, at that point, dragged out the old Persona soundboard that we owned, but had only used for occasional folk concerts that we would do there in the sanctuary several times a year. So pulled out the soundboard and that got that hooked up with a proper set of microphones. So between the PTZ cameras and the soundboard, we really upped the quality of the service that we could broadcast out and started doing those live out of the sanctuary. So that was, I mean, that initial run at it with just the early equipment and then the significant equipment upgrade to get us from what I'll call phase 2A to phase 2B with much better quality coming out of the sanctuary. Then we got to phase 3 starting really back last summer when the COVID numbers were looking better. And we actually dared to start to let a limited audience back into the sanctuary. And as the numbers got better, the number of bodies we allowed in the sanctuary kept going up to the point where we could pretty much fill the place up. Now, of course, have been sliding back in the opposite direction. In fact, just over the last couple of weeks, last week, we dropped all the way back to phase 1, where we just, for the first time in a long time, had to do the full pre-recorded service. This Sunday, we're hoping to be back to phase 2 at least and have the very limited number of people in the sanctuary, but do the live show with the speakers and the choir and whoever else is participating, but nobody else in the sanctuary. So basically, I've said our phase 2 level, and whenever the Omicron thing dies down a little bit and at the rate it's burning through the population, we're hoping that's going to be relatively soon before everybody in the country has been exposed to Omicron. I think we're closing in on that date at a frightening rate, but I hope to get back to our full hybrid service. But that flexibility of on pretty short notice being able to say, sorry guys, we just can't have people in the sanctuary, we're going back to the virtual services, and have what we hope is a fairly seamless transition over to that. We had a pretty good audience last week on just the straight pre-recorded service, and hopefully we'll do that again this coming Sunday with our live service out of the sanctuary. But that level of flexibility has been tremendous given the up and down in the COVID numbers and the constant reevaluation that goes on literally week by week, day by day, as we all watch the news and get the numbers. So I think the tech has just been such a critical part of our ability to deal with that and keep stuff going as best we can. And really, I think doing a pretty good job of it as we ride these waves up and down with the COVID numbers.
So what do you think, what do you find do you find the challenge of putting on a live service, even without people in the room, or a virtual service? Which one is more of a challenge at this point?
The combined, the hybrid is technically the most challenging because we've got the audience to keep track of. So when it comes to things like doing a hymn, one of our fourth team member, in addition to basically the camera operator, the vMix video director, and my running the soundboard, we have one remote tech team member who's the Zoom host and manages all of the Zoom stuff. And they've been starting to put up their own, just put the lyrics up on the screen while the choir is singing and do some things that are separate from what goes on in the sanctuary. So we're just starting a toe in the water on separating the video experience between in the sanctuary and the Zoom audience. But a lot of that has been out of the soundboard, managing the different mixes. I actually use the Zoom as the main because it's got all of the feeds coming in and everything going out. And I'd really rather listen to the mains most of the time, making sure that we're putting a good signal out to Zoom. At the same time, then we do a mix minus for the speakers there in the sanctuary, because the choir, the piano, a number of the things, even some of the soloists really need very little support from the microphones and the soundboard and those powered speakers. So I can drop a lot of that out of the mix, but then still have to manage the mix separately in the room. And we also have an assistive listening feed that runs out through another mix, as well as then just a single speaker out in the foyer. Sometimes when there are some people out there, we have an overflow audience. And the main challenge really has just been keeping track of all of the different mixes. I'm literally running 4 or 5 different mixes and keeping all of them running as we do the candle boat with different speakers and the volume being up and down and chasing that all over. And, just the constant balancing in the audio mix and keeping track of all of the different mixes feeding out.
Yeah, it's sounds terribly complex, and but it really is necessary for a smooth event, because there are a lot of concerns and a lot of different audiences in the room and outside the room. You have the people on the chancel, the choir, the worship leaders. That's one audience that needs to hear things. You have the congregants in the room. Those are people who need to hear things, and that's different from the first group. And then you have the people at home who need to hear something different still, and you need to keep track of all of this. But it's would you say that once you have all of that laid out and you know what it's all doing and you've got it all working, that do you find it terribly complex to operate?
Not operating once it's all up and running, but the variability week to week, in particular through just the Christmas weekend, we had over a span of 4 days, we had 4 completely different setups. And with the 16 input board, I was just shuffling stuff around between a kids pageant and then a Friday, Christmas Eve, we did a 9 o'clock service and then a completely different configuration for the 11 o'clock service. And then we're back on Sunday morning with a reading up on the stage, a Dylan Thomas story with people up on the stage. And that constant shuffling of the cables and the microphones and moving it around and then trying to get it all rebalanced with usually very, very quick sound checks. People walk up and go, hello, hello. And okay, am I done yet?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of visiting Westport, Connecticut, UU Church, who has a very impressive architectural building and a very nice sanctuary, and working with gear that was not really intended for this kind of purpose, but they're making it work while they are, working towards upgrading the soundboard in particular, and cameras and such. You have some new cameras and working towards getting those situated and installed properly. After, I know your sanctuary is getting some physical renovations done, which can complicate things as well. And they had a very ambitious program for Christmas that was that was tremendous. And so congratulations.
Thank you.
Come a long way. Come a long way. All right. And I see Keith Miller from Silver Spring, Maryland is up next. Hi, Keith.
Hello. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, so I'm from I guess, moderate to small congregation, which is Paint Branch, which is only about 2 miles from the congregation that Marty works with. Our experience has actually been quite a bit different from what I've heard from some other people here. So like just about everybody else, we made our decision to stop having services in the building really suddenly. It was on a Thursday or Friday, and we actually, remarkably to me, got it together for a service with everybody doing things from their homes by that Saturday. And I'm really surprised we were able to do that. At first, we had some big problems. We didn't realize how awful the sound of a piano was going through the built-in microphone in a laptop. So our minister, right on the spur of the moment, stopped at Best Buy on the way home after one of these services and bought 2 plug-in microphones made by Blue. And so since then, almost all the time, what we've done is the only person in the building for the Sunday service is the pianist. We have never gone back to having the congregation or any significant fraction of them in the sanctuary. I guess maybe we're all too risk averse, but we've come a little close a couple times, but we've never tried it. So the pianist has a laptop and a Blue microphone plugged into it, aimed at the piano. And so basically all he has to do is log into Zoom and mute and unmute himself and play the music, and that part works fine. He does it live, by the way. And the rest of the service, actually, we do things more live than pre-recorded. In particular, if it's basically one sermon given by the minister, that's almost always live. The musicians, sometimes live, sometimes pre-recorded. We have a lot of talented singers, and the second of these 2 microphones just floats around the congregation. Whoever's going to be singing in the next service borrows the microphone and plugs it into their laptop and does it from their home. Or sometimes the pianist may pre-record something and email it to one of the vocalists, who will then record his or her part over it. And so that may be pre-recorded, either video or audio video. And I think people much prefer having things being done right at that moment rather than being pre-recorded, because we can respond to each other. We keep the chat line open. We use it for joys and sorrows. We use it for announcements. Even just any time during a service, people will just type in a comment, and it seems to work pretty well. It doesn't get overdone. I've also noticed a very strong difference in preference among people. Some people have no interest at all in watching services over Zoom and just don't participate. There's some people that I just have not seen in almost 2 years. Some people prefer being able to get out of bed and walk into the computer room and log on, and there they are. And it sure has a lot to say for it and convenience. And of course, we have, like I've also heard, people who have moved away, but who still like to watch our services and sometimes even participate in them. Let's see, I'm reading my notes here. And some other things we do. The choir has done some recordings in 2 different ways. About two and a half months ago, we had about a dozen or so choir members in our parking lot, recorded with an iPhone and a little microphone that Shure makes that plugs directly in to the iPhone, and it came out really nicely. I was there. I'm making backup audio recordings on a Zoom digital recorder, but it turned out the ones from the phone came out fine. So they recorded I don't know, a dozen songs or so, and we use those in the services, one or two at a time. We also have done a few where, I'm sure you've all seen things like this where the singers are all in separate boxes and they come in and out, and, we hire a professional audio person. Everybody records their own part in their home to the same piano background, sends their part to the audio video guy. He assembles it, and we use those. And when people speak, again, I think maybe 2/3 of the people who speak do it live. A few people will pre-record it. It's just individual preference. But in my experience, the live things seem to work a little better. There just always seem to be technical problems with pre-recorded things. The technical person who's supposed to take control of the screen and start the recording, something goes wrong and the recording doesn't start properly or something. Whereas live things from people's homes seem to work better. And yeah, occasionally somebody goofs up, but the same thing happens when you're all together in the building. And I think there's a lot of tolerance for that. And of course, occasionally you have to yell at someone to unmute themselves, but we're all used to that. We do have a couple of big problems. One of them is volunteer burnout, because this makes a lot of demands on people for several different tech roles, and there just aren't quite enough people to be able to handle things, and it's tough on people. I think our giving has gone down. If you don't see the basket going by that you can drop a 5 or a 10 into, you can, people give less. You can also give by text message, but somehow that doesn't seem to draw people to do it. So yeah, giving is down, volunteer resources are down, and those are a big problem.
How about attendance, online attendance?
I don't keep track of that. I know we do. I think it may overall have gone up. It certainly hasn't gone down very much. And I think there are some people who simply choose not to watch them online, but I think contrasting that with people who've moved away, who are elderly and have getting out of houses, I think overall the balance is that more people watch the services online. So I'll just mention 2 other things before I shut up. We did one service from the sanctuary in July. We hired Marty to do that. And with the equipment, the sound equipment that we had, plus a lot of his own video and switching equipment that he brought into our sanctuary, it took a good solid 2 days of work to connect everything up and get it working. And I at least was not at all confident Sunday morning that it was going to work. But it did. Marty handled most of the video. I handled the sound mostly. There were a couple of other people doing other aspects of the tech stuff, and we had about 5 people that were actually giving the service. And it was a really great experience. So people really want to be back in the building. And I think it was a really great experience, even for the people who were watching from home. It really made a difference. Our plan at that time was to work back in that direction, but August, September, the COVID numbers started getting worse. And so we had to drop that idea for a while. Then the COVID numbers started getting better, and we thought, okay, maybe we can do it now. But then the COVID numbers are getting worse again. And right now we're kind of in limbo. And one other problem we had was we had a service in mid-November on a race issue, and our service got attacked. Some well-organized group of people About 2/3 of the way through, came in, took over control of the Zoom meeting, and started showing hardcore pornography and sending out insults both over chat and verbally. And they were able to do it in such a way that it really appeared like members of the congregation were insulting other members of the congregation. The tech people that were running things made some efforts to get control back, but they couldn't. And so we just shut the whole thing down. And we actually plan on redoing that one in a couple of weeks. And since then, unfortunately, we've had to tighten up our security. We were as open as possible. Anybody could watch us. I mean, anybody can still watch us on YouTube. Anybody could join the Zoom meeting. Now it's not so easy. You can't come into the Zoom meeting unless, we have a waiting room and somebody has to know who you are to let you in. And one of our big hopes had always been, be as open as possible, attract new people. And right now that's getting a lot harder to do. So that's where we are now. We're kind of in limbo based on volunteer time, budgets, and COVID and security.
Yeah, that's a difficult experience to have, to be Zoom bombed by an well-organized, disruptive organization. That was very unfortunate. But you have done quite a few significant things this year that, helped bring your congregation along. And I know that you're looking to do more, looking to make some upgrades. And I did want to pick up on one thing that you said that you do that I thought was quite interesting and innovative, is that you have a good quality microphone that you pass around to worship participants, whether it be choir members or clergy or leadership, whoever is going to be participating in the service, so that they have a nice piece of equipment, good quality, that is a known quantity, that will give you reliable results. So that's a really nice thing to do. To have a couple of because good microphones can be expensive and not everybody can afford that, but everybody wants to be able to sing with the choir. And for the church to invest in a couple of those and be able to pass those around, as long as you're doing like virtual choirs and you're doing pre-recorded stuff, well, why not? That's just, it'll make for a better presentation. And then everybody doesn't have to, bear the burden of that investment on their own. The church can have a couple of pieces that they can then pass around. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, and I think, Zoom doesn't really allow really high quality sound. And so, I think easily for $100, you can get a microphone that is as good as you'll ever need for a Zoom meeting. Maybe other people have better information, but I think Zoom is the limiting factor, not the microphone.
Well, you can get some really good quality audio out of Zoom. Not quite as good as YouTube, but very respectable. You have to check all the settings. You want to turn on original sound. You want to turn off noise cancellation and echo reduction. You want to turn on high quality sound. There are a number of switches in the audio settings that you want to turn on. And when you're doing a service as you would a meeting, where people are logging in from home and you're like we're doing here, we're passing the baton from one person to another person. Each of those people have to have their settings correct.
Yeah.
Right? So there's another style of production that we often use where we may have two actual shows going on. We may have a private show that's done on Zoom where where we would take the output of what we're doing here and then stream it to another platform like YouTube. And then it's more controllable and more organized. Even if you stream it out to another Zoom call, right? So that would be one login, that would be the entire program. And then all of the attendees are watching that and interacting with each other, rather than having everybody all on one call, which is a little bit harder to control. Leo, I see you're up next.
Thank you, Marty. I think I've been listening to this conversation, and there's lots of things on this which I think are really interesting. And I just wanted to comment on a few points that have been raised. I thought that what's brilliant is listening to people on a different journey, and there isn't a right way. The right way is actually to do things. Sometimes what you do doesn't work. I think I can point at many days when things just don't work. But it doesn't mean to say that it wasn't worth trying. And I think that's the critical point. You can get these things better. I think I listened to some of the stuff at the beginning when you were talking about using webcams. I don't use a webcam. I use a higher definition camera, and I do think it makes a difference. We were talking about audio. I don't use a standard microphone. This microphone costs around about $400. So it's an expensive microphone. It does make a difference. Doesn't mean to say what you're doing is wrong. I think that's really key. It just means that you look at changing, and potentially you look at changing. But I think this is exactly the same point that we've all experienced as worship moves forward and the technology moves forward. But what it shouldn't be about is the technology. The technology shouldn't be the driving force. The driving force should be the worship, and the technology should be enabling it. And that's where I think some of the stuff that Matthew was talking about when he's talking about his church in Mexico is how they've actually used it to enable where they're going, and that they're bringing people in. I do think we've all experienced that there has been the personal burnout of people. That's really tough. That is really tough. We've also experienced the change in personnel and the change in people who are attending. That's also super tough, because when you've been doing something for, in the cases of many churches, 20 to 50 to 100 years plus the same way, when you're suddenly presented by a quick right-hand turn, it's really tough to suddenly say that the same people have come on the journey with you. So, it's going to be interesting. I do think, though, the best thing I'm hearing is that people are saying they're adding stuff, they're looking at it, it's changing, and they're going to keep doing what they're doing. Because I think the biggest thing about everything that I hear over and over and over again is the new normal is what we have now. We've got a bit of hybrid, we've got a bit of in the room, we've got a bit remote, we've got, and it's gonna continue. I can't ever see everybody going, that's it, we're never gonna have anything but in the room, or saying we're never going to do anything but just being remote. So I think that's my biggest takeaway with all of this is keep doing it and seeing it, and just get it so that the technology isn't sitting in your way. Just make it so that the technology sits behind.
That's really important, and that's very, very, very well said, Leo. Thank you. Yeah, the point is not to have the technology. It's not a bragging point. It's not a pride point. It's all about how you use it, and how you use it to enable your worship leaders to communicate better and bring your community closer together. So yeah, there are things that are changing, and people have come a long way and have different experiences and are different places on the journey. And we are here every week, either at 7 o'clock on Thursdays or 3 o'clock at Thursdays on the East Coast, and other parts of the world to discuss these things with you and help people move along on that arc of the journey, and to figure out all the little twists and turns that are thrown in our way as we travel, and to navigate. Can we bring people in the room? No, we can, but we were able to for a while, and now we can't, and we don't know how long this is going to go on or what's going to come next. So, that's one of the things about, as Bruce was saying, one of the things about having this capability to do live streaming and or mix of hybrid and virtual services, having this capability and this flexibility means that we can be agile in how we do things, and on a week-to-week basis, and whether we can bring people in or not, whether we can have live services with just clergy and a pianist in the room and have everybody else contribute from home, or have a full complement, or have nobody at all in the building. You have that flexibility, you have that capability, or you should. That's the idea. That's what we're working towards. And that keeps things together. So I want to get to a couple of questions, and then if anybody wants to share about their past experiences and their accomplishments, we can continue, and or we'll move on to the next phase and talk about what we're looking forward to. And so Keith Miller from Paint Branch, Maryland, is asking, are USB cables only good for short distances? Well, USB cables are actually designed to be used at, I'm going to say, 12 feet or less. There are some higher quality USB cables that can maybe go a little bit further. They tend to be expensive. So that's what the USB bus was designed for, is peripherals that are connected directly to your computer at short distances. Now, that said, you can get extenders that can either put USB on the Ethernet or on a Cat5 cable between 2 points, and can enable you to go much longer. Whether I would use that for a webcam or not, personally, I would probably not. Some people have also tried to use them with audio interfaces at a distance and not had a lot of good luck with that either. So be really careful about USB. Leo, you're muted.
I know. I realized I'm muted. I was just gonna jump in on that as just to say that there is some restrictions that you can't deal with on certain things with USB, and the one that Marty's touched on just there is audio. Audio will not go a distance over USB. I've tried it quite a few times, but you'll go about 30 foot maximum. In fact, I think it's slightly shorter than that. And the reason is just the latency. So if you try and connect up an audio interface, including the Behringer XR range of mixers, you can put one extension cable on it, but the minute you put a second one in, it will just keep breaking down. The audio won't pass that distance because it just isn't designed. It just can't keep. The latency of it will not work. So that's a problem. The other thing is you've got to look at the speed for video. So remember that when you put these connections on, things will last. Some things will work and some things won't. So you can put a Stream Deck on the other end, and a Stream Deck, if anybody doesn't remember what they are, that's a Stream Deck. So that's it, effectively, it's got a video panel behind here, behind the buttons, and you can quite easily extend that around about, I'm going to talk in metric here, you can extend it around about 50 meters over without any problems on USB over Ethernet. But other things like cameras, you are asking a lot of getting out of the USB bus if you go too far with them.
Right. There are actually more than three. There are like 5 or 6 different standards for USB, for the USB bus and for USB communications. The differences are the data transfer speed, the power capabilities, because USB can power a device, the data bandwidth capabilities, which is different than the speed. And so, you'll know these by USB 1, USB 2, USB 3, USB 3.x. So depending on the device that you're trying to connect, needs to match the correct kind of port on your computer. You don't want to plug in a USB 3 device into a USB 2 or USB 1 port. It just won't work or won't be reliable because it won't have the speed that is necessary. And you can go to Wikipedia and find information on this. You can also go to a number of other sites. If you do a search for USB standards, you will get you'll find lots of information about the differences between the different kinds of USB ports and what they can operate on. Next question from Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Ireland, Northern Ireland. Picking up on something that Bruce said, how many of you have different video experiences for your in-person congregation and your online one? What does that look like? Assuming separate sound mixes for the room and online are fairly commonplace. All right. Anybody want to respond to that? All right. Different video experiences for the in-person congregation and the online congregation. Well, there certainly will be visual content that you'll want to show your online viewers that may not be appropriate for the in-room viewers. Like, for example, because of latency issues, you wouldn't want to put a person that's standing on the pulpit on the screen because there'll be a latency delay. And so somebody will be talking, and then anywhere from a fraction to a couple of seconds later, they would do the same thing on screen. And so that's very distracting for people in the room. Plus, unless it's a really large room, you don't need that kind of image magnification on the room of people in the sanctuary. However, if you're showing hymn lyrics or song lyrics or graphics or video playback, those are things that you want to show to both groups of congregants. So there are things that you'll want to play for both and some that you'll only want to show for online. And so, yes, that calls for 2 different video experiences, 2 different video mixes or outputs, one that you can show in room and one that you're sending online. And audio is also different because depending on the content of your services, there's always speech, but there may be music. And depending on the kind of music, not everything needs to be amplified in your room. If you have a loud piano, grand piano in a fairly small room, you don't need to amplify that. If you have musicians with amplifiers, you don't need to amplify that again. If you have percussion, you don't generally need to amplify that in the room, but all of that does need to be captured and mixed and balanced for the people at home. So that is a different mix, different audio experience for both of those congregations as well.
There you go. Sorry, I was just on mute. I think you've given a really good answer to that, Marty, from a technical perspective. I'm going to answer it from a slightly different perspective about the relationship of what's in the room and what's not in the room. And I think that's always the key for me is a really difficult match. How do you give somebody a solution that's in the room, or how do you give somebody, the person at home, priority that they feel like they're actually wanted and needed to be there against the people in the room? And this is always super tough. It's really hard. Our brain is set that if there's somebody in the front of you, you talk to the person there. Person at the side on these cameras that you can't see, they're not the people that you sort of interact with. And so that comes quite difficult. So how do you do that, and how do you deal with that? So some of the things that I've seen, maybe not always in services, but I've seen them in other areas, is that you get a different element of the actual live experience for the people at home. And maybe what it is you turn around and do in your coffee part or something, you say, we're just going to do this bit and we're just going to deal with the questions from the people at home. Or we're going to just we're going to have a conversation with the people at home. And now we're going to go back into the room with the people here. And you literally spend a bit of time where you focus on the people at home rather than you focus on the people there. Or you just do something, you make sure that when you have something where you're calling up people to read something, you're calling up different people that are both in the room or different people from home. There's lots of ways of doing it. And even to the point that you start the service at home later or earlier, or you carry it on later or earlier. And I think that would be the bit that I would say in answer to Graham's question, is to try and find differences. And if anything, highlight the differences rather than just making the two exactly the same, because I think it's just super tough to try and deliver the same thing to two groups of people at the same time. And that's why I think always when we talk about hybrid, when people try and do both at the same time, it's just super tough.
See, that's why I like working with you, Leo. I may come up with a technical answer, but you come up with a human one. And that is really important, is figuring out how to make the people who are watching at home not feel like they're outside the building looking in through a window, right? That engagement is really, really important. This is really interesting that Zoom is not spotlighting people on its own. So that engagement, and this is something that I think is worth looking into and worth working on as a group, and bringing our worship leaders into this conversation, because I'm not really sure that they're having this particular kind of conversation amongst themselves. Is how to work with cameras and how to work with microphones and how to figure out in their style, in their presentation, how to draw in people from home, and make them feel, more special, even more special than people who are in the room, if anybody is in the room. And that's a really good idea, is to have a part of the service that is addressed specifically to them. Like, I'm looking at you now and pointing at you now, like I'm seeing you, right?
I think that's you touched on something I haven't even thought about, but I wonder, ministers get taught, they spend a lot of time learning. They go off to, some of them have got qualifications from universities. They've got qualifications from various different bodies, etc. And I guess none of them up to this time have ever learned how to do this part, this online delivery. I guess it must be very similar to when they came out with the motor car and nobody had a driving license. And
right.
It took a bit of time, and now it's like you wouldn't be. Nobody would expect you just to depending on the country, just to rock up, get it behind the wheel and drive. And it's going to take a bit of time, and it's going to take a bit of time to get the knowledge of what's good, what's bad, and and you only know what's good when you know what's bad. So I think that's a bit that we've got to try and work out, and we've got to try and see how it's going to fit in. But I don't think I don't think we can be critical. That's my thought. Let's not. It's just it's going to get, some of it's good, some of it's bad, and it's life. That's it.
Well, we're all trying to figure it out. Keith, you have something to add?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is about the experience of the ministers. So we changed ministers several months ago, and I think both of them had this in common. So, they're sitting at a desk at their home giving the sermon, and they've both said that they really don't like looking at a computer screen of black rectangles. They really want to see the people that they're speaking to. And so they much prefer if the people sitting at home will turn on their video so they, so the minister can see what kind of response she's getting. But actually what I was going to say before that was another example of sort of the Zoom experience versus the in-person experience. One thing we've done for, I guess, most of the pandemic time is when the formal service is over and we stop the recording and the live streaming, we have breakout rooms. And so they set up, I believe at random, enough rooms so that each breakout room maybe has 5 or 6 people in it. And at the end, a little pop-up window appears saying you can go to room number such and such. Because there were a lot of complaints that, people miss talking in the lobby or out on the deck afterwards. And this is kind of a substitute for that. And some people don't like that, but I actually kind of do like it because it's a random group of people every time. And so I've gotten into conversations with people I just never would have happened to talk to before, because I think, like most people, I tend to gravitate towards the people I already know. And I find it pretty interesting. It's a random group of 5 or 6 of us talking about what we just heard in the service and whatever else is on our minds. Sometimes the conversation doesn't go that well and I just log off quickly. Sometimes it's really interesting, and I wouldn't have had that experience if it wasn't for the Zoom experience. So,
and that is one of the, that's a good point, and thank you for that. That is one of the advantages that Zoom has over, a one-way broadcast such as YouTube, is that it does have that engagement. It is a two-way platform that people can interact with. You can, during the service, you can see other people, and getting people to turn their cameras on, that's a community building thing. It's like the equivalent of sitting in the sanctuary with your hat and your coat on and your scarf over your face, and hiding like you have something to hide from. That would be something that worship leaders would want to encourage people not to do. You're part of a community. Come in. Feel comfortable exposing yourself. Let us see who you are and where you are. That's a community building thing. But the coffee hour breakout room thing is a great idea. In that it encourages people to get to know each other, conversation, new people, old people, visitors who are coming in. It's a very, very close equivalent, parallel to the in-person coffee experience, and that's really nice. Bruce, let's throw it to you. Oh, yes, Keith.
And just add one
follow up.
Yeah, something else I just thought of that we started doing a few months ago. Right at the beginning, after the introduction of the call to worship and and I guess after the chalice lighting, the minister will generally say something like, I encourage everyone, turn on their video, turn on their audio, switch to gallery view, and everybody say hello to each other and wave their hands. And okay, it's kind of gimmicky, but for just a moment, you see 25 or so other people saying hello, waving their hands to each other. It only lasts 30 seconds, but it's a nice experience and it adds to the feeling of being part of the group.
Thank you for that. Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah. Following up on a couple of things we've been talking about. One, the coffee hour piece of, the coffee hour chat at the end of these recorded services very early on, we realized was one of the really incredible parts of Zoom. So much of the power of Zoom, and we've talked about the video quality, the audio quality. I know Zoom has improved both of those and is working furiously, but we at the same time we have largely stuck with Zoom because of that interactivity, and found out very early on, in particular when we started with those straight 45, 50-minute recorded services at the end, to finish that and just open it up into the coffee hour. And in fact, we would, we'd get 100 or 150 people on these calls back then, and we would set up breakout sessions. So just randomly assign everybody, and now you're in a group with half a dozen people, and everybody got to talk, and it really was such a critical part of holding the community together through those early COVID days. So I really have seen the power of the chat rooms and those really that virtual coffee hour as a part of the Zoom experience. But back to the question or the comment about the different video experience for the home Zoom audience versus the in the sanctuary. I've said we one of our Zoom operators told us a couple of weeks ago, I found this really cool thing called OBS. And had downloaded it and was researching it a little bit, and it did something that we wanted to do so badly in Zoom. When you do a screen share in Zoom, it just takes over the whole screen. And taking that same, whatever it is, PowerPoint, Word document, something with just a picture of lyrics, and running it through OBS and making it into a virtual camera, now we can put up one view of, say, the sanctuary with the people or the choir singing, and then on the other side of the screen have that second camera come up and put up the lyrics. So just that really simple trick using OBS, but it requires a separate, basically video operator at that point. There's a second video director. And we've talked so many times about the level of the volunteer operators, that basically we've got in large part a bunch of amateurs trying to do this. And just those simple things of having to manage two different video experiences, now we require an additional operator. So the fact that it was one of our Zoom hosts who happened to get into it, I thought was fantastic. If we could get a couple of people trained up to do that, I think that would be a tremendous addition to the Zoom video experience. But we're starting to partition out that video production work. So we've actually got one person in the sanctuary working on the sanctuary experience, and somebody else at home adding some stuff in to the Zoom video. And as long as we can divvy up the work and get a couple of more people involved, it doesn't require the level of technical skill. I'm sure one skilled person could do all of this, but nobody in our group, at least at this point in time, is up to that level. So it's always that trade-off of how do we kind of break it up into pieces and modularize the work, at the same time have enough different volunteers who can get trained and do the different pieces. And that's just all a part of the juggling act we're working with right now.
Yeah, well, it's a progression for sure. Figuring out how to produce a good looking, good sounding, engaging worship webcast online experience is not an easy thing to do. It's not just about the technology, it's not just about the equipment, it's about a strategy, it's about a planning, it's about creativity, right? Because, as we're hearing here today, you can do a lot with a little bit of equipment if you use it creatively, if you understand how it works. Understanding how it works, though, that's a key thing, and that's really important. Fortunately, we're living at a time where that kind of information is really easily found and readily available on the internet, and there are many different perspectives on that too. Not all the information is the best information, but if you have to be a little bit careful about the sources that you're getting this information from, like manufacturer videos are probably good sources. There are some power users that produce a lot of videos who explain how equipment can be used and should be used and how not to use them, and those are good too. And there are resources like this here, and like Office Hours and AV Tech Talks and others that are really good sources of information to learn how you can use equipment both alone and creatively as a group of equipment to achieve a certain result that you're trying to accomplish.
I just want to add on to this that I think it's fascinating, this, because you're talking about how things move and expand. And it almost taking it to the pure basics, and you say that you start off at the beginning, you're just offering coffee, and now you're offering coffee and tea. And it's like, well, okay, so we need to learn how to do something extra. We need to learn how to do something that's different. OBS, I mean, I've been using it for a long time. I actually don't recommend OBS any longer, but I've been using it for a long time. And at the beginning, it was really hard. It's got a lot easier than where it was. There are some tricks. And actually, if you go and look at the show, the last one of this, if I think it was the right one, isn't it, Marty? When you covered the Stream Deck and the automation, that's the bit that actually brings all of the things like OBS or vMix or any of these other ones, makes it much, much, much easier. Effectively, the equivalent of a coffee vending machine. So you just have to press the buttons and out comes your cappuccino. That's where you need to be when you get where you want to go. But it is hard, but it is worth doing. And maybe there aren't the skills at the moment. That's difficult. That's always a difficult problem. But sometimes you actually find that the skills that you did need 2 years ago, everything was really complex, everything was really difficult, everything was very, very, very manual. And now the skills of being able to do things like just say, here are 5 buttons, and you press button 1, that gives you that camera, button 2 gives you that view on that camera. And you find that somebody can just sit there and just press the 5 buttons to get the 5 different views, and that's all they need.
Yes, absolutely. This finding volunteers, the number of volunteers, and what they're being asked to do, and what they're being asked to remember to do. I've come across a few interesting articles and research about how we learn and how we retain what we learn. And techniques for reinforcing what we learn so that we remember it longer. Learning a whole bunch of things all at once and then using it just once a week or once every few weeks is not a really good way to learn. And if we can learn fewer things and apply them more often, we're more apt to retain that information and not just retain the information, but be able to understand it as well. So how do we reduce the number of things that we have to learn as a volunteer to do one of these things? Well, one of those answers is automation and control systems. Like, so Leo was saying that you can press one button and perform multiple functions with that one button, and you don't need to know what those multiple functions were or how they needed to be done manually. All you need to know is you push this one button and that happens, right? And so that makes things much easier to learn, much easier to recruit people because the learning curve is a lot shorter and not as tall, and just makes the operation smoother and more predictable. And this is a really good jumping off point for moving forward to looking forward and what we plan to do, what we would like to do, and where we'd like to go over the next year. So who would like to talk about what they're looking forward to in improving and making things easier? Till, go ahead.
Yeah, but we so far have we have a very small congregation. We have maybe 55 members, active members, and at any given point we have maybe 25 people in the sanctuary when it's open. Of course, now we're shutting down again. The challenges we have moving forward is we've gotten people used to the whole idea of being in a Zoom and having services and being able to do that, which was with an aging congregation like we have, it was a big learning curve for a lot of people in the church. And we know the people who will never unmute when they speak, and we try to train them, and that's always a funny thing. Oh, we know Sylvia is not going to mute, so I have to sort of learn how to read lips here, But so there's a huge learning curve there. There's also, now that we jumped into the Zoom thing, there's a number of us who really want to see it, expand and be used not just to facilitate service in this COVID environment, or this pandemic environment, but use it as a way of growing the church. And so that's a hard thing to sell to people who've just gotten over the hump of using this technology to be able to participate in services, and selling the value of this whole new venture that we're on at our church. And then when we get into, okay, we can use webcams, which is, yeah, they work, in a very minimal way. And then trying to sell the executive board or committee, which ends up being a huge chunk of our membership anyways, on why do we want to go and spend the extra money on, going to a PG type camera and increasing the video experience and the entire experience for both people in the church and people far away, and how do we market that, as a means of growing our membership. So there's a lot of hurdles. The technology is one, and we tend to get into the weeds of the technology because, admittedly, I've been in this business. I've worked communications my whole life. I was doing video broadcasting back in the days when you'd have T-Carrier be able to get a signal from one place to another, and it cost, $50,000, $60,000, or you had to go down to, one of the local video conferencing centers to do a video conference. And now that we've got the technology today, this whole thing just turns out to be, it's a huge issue on many fronts of how do you sell this. And then once you've got people to trust that what we're going to do now is worth the investment, what happens all of a sudden we grow and we start getting into some of the issues that some of the other folks here are talking about. And unfortunately, we get into those issues, then all of a sudden the naysayers, if you will, are saying, oh, see, I told you so. And you have to then explain, well, we got into this situation because we took the step forward and now we got to work through that step. Just like if all of a sudden we had a sanctuary overflowing with people, how do we handle that? Do we put an addition on the church or whatever? So it's all the same type of stuff. Just this technology to a lot of our membership is scary. It's really scary. And
Is your membership skewed to the older generations?
we basically have a church that I would say 65 to 75% of our membership is 70 years and older. We have getting very few younger people in. We live in a very rural area. That's where our church is, and most of the new blood we get in comes through the military base, and those are sort of ephemeral memberships. They're here for a couple months and then they're gone. And but we'd like to retain them through using this technology. So even if they're shipped up to Japan, they can still be part of our church.
And that's very key.
Yeah, it
So
is.
I would okay. So a couple of things. I would recommend sampling. I mean, it's very easy these days, any day of the week, but particularly on Sundays. Find some other churches and look at what they're doing online, right? You'll find a really broad spectrum of video quality, audio quality, presentation quality, and look at the viewing numbers if they're available, right? See how many people are watching. And you will find that just your interest, your own personal interest in watching a live stream, what is it about that particular presentation that makes it more interesting to you?
Right.
What is holding your attention? And what about particular streams like just are not interesting at all, don't hold your attention? Make note of those things. That's really important, because if you're not interested in this kind of presentation, but you're interested in that kind of presentation, what are the differences there? You're not going to attract people with a presentation that is not engaging.
Exactly. And, I come from a very, my mother was a director, producer, actress in Europe and in the United States. And I'm trying to educate the people in the congregation on, not only the technology, but how do we produce this? How do we make this a satisfying production for everybody participating in it? And so that's just another component of the whole complexity and the many different levels which I have to try to manage this whole thing. Then of course we got to the volunteer thing. Just to talk technology alone, there's maybe myself and one other person in the church can do this stuff, and we will get burnt out. Which is why the solution I'm looking for has to be the simplest one now. Things like OBS and stuff. Right now, if I had a full-time job there doing it, yeah, I do OBS. I've used OBS for years, but teaching someone else how to do that and stuff can get very complicated. So it's got to be plug and play, remote control in hand. That's about the level we can bring that part of the production up now. Then we got to work on all the participants and how they interact with the this new streaming and the hybrid situation where they're also facing in congregation, or will be again, hopefully in the next couple of months. So there's a lot of components here.
There are a lot of components, and a lot of it will be driven by the ministry, right?
Well,
and by the ministry's dedication and understanding of how important this is to the survival of the church.
Well, that is exactly what I'm, proselytizing now. Because if we don't do something to step up, we must. So we got a beautiful campus with nobody in it, and at some point we either got to make the choice of, do we sell this and, share a church with somebody else, or just lease a meeting hall? Or are we gonna do something to salvage what we've got and grow it? And frankly, with an
So
old,
I'll leave you.
they're afraid of growing. They're comfortable where they are.
I've seen that before. Afraid of success, fear of success.
Yep.
So I'll leave you with just two thoughts, and then we'll have Bruce come in and offer you his thoughts, because I'm sure he will have something to say about this. Having very simple systems that are manually operated can be very complex to do good things with. Having a more complete system that is simple to operate is more complex to assemble and program. But the end result is a much simpler operation, or an operation that is more easily operated by people who don't need as much training. So when we think about a webcam, for example, in a sanctuary, what size is your room?
I would say the sanctuary is probably 40 feet wide by maybe 60 to 70 feet deep in that range.
All right, so that's a sizable room, right?
Yes, it is.
And if you're going to have one camera, in the back of the room, that's a USB connected web camera,
It won't be in the back, but anyways, so.
Well, so let's look at the one that you talked about, the Logitech Pro 2. This camera has a 10 times zoom on it, and it has the remote control is by infrared handheld only, and has 3 camera presets plus a home position. So basically 4 presets. It is an HD camera, so that's pretty good, but it has a limited zoom range and limited number of presets for positioning and views. Is your service, what kind of music style is in your service? Do you have a choir? Do you have a band? Do you have any kind of performance?
We have a pianist, and we rely a lot on, YouTube videos and that type of stuff.
Okay. So, as a 1080 camera, as long as you get it close enough to the pulpit area, to the chancel, you'll have, a couple of good images, provided that the lighting is done well. If you don't have good lighting, that's one of the most important things to get a good video image is lighting. Right?
It's a very bright sanctuary, lots of windows.
Well, that's not necessarily a good thing.
That can be bad because we have to invest in blinds and stuff to control that lighting.
You'll get hot spots of light here and dark spots of light there, and then the lighting conditions change, and some days is bright and some days is dim, and that's going to change how the camera looks, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a very entry level PTZ camera that's going to give you very limited options. Right?
It will, but compared to where we are now,
it's an upgrade. I understand. I understand.
We have 2 depth stack, $25 webcams.
Right.
Right.
Which so it is a step up. It is a step up. And as you try and bring your clergy and your board along in how they think about the importance of web streaming, right? And the sometimes difficult recognition that this is the future of worship and, is not going away. And in order to be convincing and in order to be able to compete with any other church, you have to produce a certain level of look and feel and sound and video quality. Right. Once they come to grips with that and they do the fundraising or they figure out how to finance it, then you'll be able to make several other improvements. Right? Bruce, what do you think about all of this?
Yeah, we're in a very different place in the journey. We've got a bigger congregation, and I said the virtual services and the broadcasting has been such a critical part of really holding the whole operation together. 18 months into this crazy journey that we started on, looking forward. Which I think was the question, what are we looking at over the next year or so? I really feel like we are getting a handle on hybrid services, on the mix of the in-sanctuary plus the at-home. There's a nice to have, at least for the moment, but something I'm thinking about that would be some new technical challenges, which is the idea of really getting the Zoom and the outside world being brought more into the sanctuary, not necessarily even just the general Zoom audience, but the notion of guest speakers, guest sermons. A couple of the groups here tonight have talked about fairly small congregations, but basically the idea of combining a couple of congregations together and sharing, not having to do it all, not having to put the whole service together, do the sermon, have the choir run your whole show. The idea that you could share some of that and let another group take part of it, but beam it into your sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole piece of the technology to me would be for where we're at in the journey, that to me is the next frontier of how do we make it more interactive. Right now, the in-sanctuary piece of it is pretty much the same, and the technology is there really for the purpose of getting stuff out into the Zoom world. But I think there are opportunities out there for taking that outside world and bringing more of it into the sanctuary, and that's some of the tech, and it affects the way the service is run. I said, guest sermons and who knows, even guest musicians coming into our sanctuary remotely affects the people that set up the services and decide what we're going to have as part of that service. But the tech piece of that, I think, we have opportunities now that we haven't had before to bring more variety, more people, more players into the services by getting the outside world more involved with what's being shown there in the sanctuary.
That's a really creative solution. I know of a number of different congregations who are forming alliance groups where they are sharing content and sharing ministers to have a more complete, richer worship experience when you can bring in musicians from other congregations, you can bring in ministers, you can bring in other lay leaders and share these content resources, whether they be live or pre-recorded. And once you have that kind of community with other churches, you can then also begin to share technology notes. How did you produce this, and what equipment are you using, and what's your workflow for producing this? And workflow is a very important part of the entire production model. You're basically producing a show every single week, and in some cases more than one a week, and that's a lot of work. It takes a lot of coordination, and it takes people to do that, and it takes consistency to do it from week to week. And so being able to spread that out amongst a number of different congregations can really ease the load and make it easier to manage. So thank you for that. All right, what else are we looking forward to improving or doing better in the next year? So something that I am looking forward. Oh, JP, go ahead.
JP, you're still on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, so as far as using Zoom to bring in outside speakers, I think it's a big one for little congregations, and we actually have a slightly less than half-time minister we share with 2 other congregations that have her for even less of the time. I think she's retired and something less than full-time total, I believe. So we have to fill in with lay ministry and other things. In the past, we've had, particularly during the summer, we've just sometimes done services, rather than a sermon or talk based around a TED talk. So what we have started doing is inviting in some guest speakers, including guest ministers. It's easy when everything is all on Zoom. When we got back to the sanctuary, probably because of the TED Talks, someone had donated a big screen TV that we can pull out and hook a laptop up to with an HDMI connection. And what we just basically do then is do a service based around that. It's what we've been doing isn't the highest tech, and there's more we might do around that, but that basic function works pretty well, and people understand that sometimes they're coming into the sanctuary to see a service that's mostly given over the big screen TV. And that's just how it is.
Yeah, and that's a really nice option to have, right? Yeah. Anybody else? So something that I'm going to be working on this year is the ability to do remote production. So we're all talking about how difficult it is to have volunteers within the congregation trained coming in early in the morning to do a setup and to learn how to do video switching, control cameras, mix audio, and do all these things. There are ways that we can operate some of this gear from outside the building. We can operate video switchers. We can remote control computers. We can even remotely control sound mixers, some sound mixers, so that we can stay home. We don't have to be in the sanctuary. We don't have to be adding to the number of people in the room. We don't have to, we can have the same people or hire people to operate some of our gear from home. And because they are listening to the same stream that everybody else is listening to, you have a better chance of getting a better product. And takes a little bit of arranging, things have got to be set up properly to enable that option, but it is very doable. And it's, the technology to do it is not very expensive. It can be done pretty much anywhere. And, that's something that I'm working on this year. In fact, I've already been doing mixing some entertainment music shows that are coming from a theater in Ireland and going out on the web to everybody else. So there are musicians in the theater. There is one audio person who is setting up microphones and connecting them up to the mixing board. And then I'm controlling the mixing board, doing a stream. And then there are other people who are switching cameras and controlling lighting and such like that, because it is a theater. They do have that kind of lighting. So it's fascinating technology. It's certainly something that wasn't possible, a while ago, even 2 years ago. Would very expensive to do that. And this, this year, it's very affordable to do. And I don't see any questions popping up in Mukana. And if there's anybody else who wants to share, please go ahead.
Yes. Actually, you raise a very interesting point, Marty, in that for me, it might be less about having somebody come and, actually run our tech for the services, as it might be having someone, like you, Leo, or somebody who's got that kind of experience and skill, kind of dropping into our equipment and looking around and saying, gee, you guys might want to consider changing these settings, or your equalization needs some improvement here, or all these different kinds of things that might be possible now, just because, the technology is there, even without us adding significant additional equipment. I don't know if that's the feasibility, but I wanted to float it.
Actually, yes. With the right equipment in-house, that is very, very doable. As a matter of fact, to give an example, there is and Leo knows about this, there's a synagogue in Minneapolis that is part of the Synagogue Tech Forum and is also part of office hours. And at some point coming up soon, they're going to get remote help on adjusting their cameras to make them look uniform, to correct for color, to correct for exposure. So there will be a number of people who will be logging in remotely to their equipment, and then that experience will be broadcast out to the wider community to observe, so that everybody can then learn, see what's being done and learn how to do it for themselves. So yes, that kind of assistance is very possible. I have several clients who I can log into their equipment remotely and either operate it from here or assist them in solving problems or finding adjustments that they can't locate to help them to do what they're doing. Keith.
Yeah. Didn't Mark Lucas show us a lot of that capability several months back? I remember him at one of these sessions showing us live how he was controlling the setup in a church in Alaska from Massachusetts.
Yes. Mark, who was at the time working for an automation company, had a client in Alaska that he was able to log into remotely and operate their cameras and their lighting. And Leo has a synagogue in London that he can also remotely log into and show us how cameras can be moved around and lighting can be turned on and off and such. So yes, absolutely. JP?
Let me unmute and drop my hand here. Yeah, that was kind of my professional bailiwick for going back actually as far as the 1980s. I did remote systems management back when it was initially character-based. I mean, the simple answer is if you can get everything to work on a computer screen, and if I understand it right, with Stream Deck Companion, you can operate a virtual Stream Deck on the computer screen. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, you can even put your Stream Deck on the screen. So if you have, especially if you get everything to the point where that and everything else can be put on one screen, then there's a variety of ways these days for remotely logging into screens. For taking or sharing control of that screen so that someone remotely can do everything from the screen that can be done. I think a lot of people might be familiar with that with PC tech help. I think it's used a fair bit. I don't know how much because I don't resort to doing that myself. I figure it out myself, but I know occasionally when it gets to something really complicated, like with Cisco, they'll get on with me and do that. So that's a pretty neat option. The other thing I was going to say, I mean, it's one of the things that may help us and might even be necessary to move forward is, you know, if only for the sake of sort of calling on a higher authority or power, you know, to bring in, you know, someone who's a sort of expert and consultant to look over our systems, and if not physically, then virtually. And so, you know, for a small isolated congregation like ours, that opens up the opportunities for expert help a lot as well.
Right. And planning for that in advance is important because you'll want to select equipment that has that capability.
Yeah.
Not every piece of equipment has that capability. Now,
Yeah.
we can take over any computer remotely, but if the equipment isn't software controlled, then we can't access it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And in some cases we don't need to operate the computer. We can access the equipment directly, which is even better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't get into that, but that's, you know, it's the other sort of thing as well. You get into the network and you can access the switches and whatnot, IP cameras, you name it. And yet another reason to go with Stream Deck Companion is because then you can put that virtual interface on the screen and you're not limited to having physical access to the device.
Mm-hmm. Right. Leo?
That's exactly the sort of thing you need to plan for, is to be able to have it to all be able to be run by the screen, even if you preferred punching the buttons on your Stream Deck most of the time.
Right.
I think I'm just going to bring a couple of points back together again, which you mentioned there, Marty, and that JP's mentioned and others have. You talked about earlier, Marty, you talked about complex systems actually can be easier to run than easy systems which become very complex to deliver. And a good example of this, and the one I always use, is the motor car. You know, the old days of motor cars, you used to be able to know what was inside and how to fix it and do everything just to keep the thing on the road. Now cars are super, super complex, but all you need to know is how to press one pedal in most cases, or two, depending if you want to stop. And that's the big difference. That's how things are. As you said there, if you choose the right mixer, the right sound mixer, you can actually physically set it up from the Stream Deck, and you can have it so that when this camera looks at this group of people, the microphone in front of them is turned on automatically. You can't do that if you're on an analog mixer. You can do it at the same time, is that when you press a button on a Stream Deck, it will stop the audio coming from the room, play a video, put up a message to say you're there, send a message to YouTube to welcome people to come into the room. You can do all of these things at once, but it's all complex to configure. But once it's configured once, it's usable by many, 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 many people. And that's the difference. It is more complex to set up, but it's much easier to use. And I think what a lot of people go is they go, we just need a webcam because it's going to be super easy. It's really super easy for one thing, but it will run out of road very, very fast. And that's where we find it in a lot of cases.
JP, do you want to add back to that?
Yeah, you know, see, the one problem that I've sort of, I first thought it through, and then it was, you know, one of the questions I got. It's like, okay, I can set up this system, you know, maybe, you know, put vMix on and everything else, but you know, what happened? It's great when it's all pre-configured, but what if the person comes in to turn it on, who's all trained on it and whatnot, and for some reason it doesn't work right, you know? And there's actually, it's one of the problems we had early on, is that, Windows or Zoom ran some update. There was a point at which both Windows and Zoom updates ran. And something changed and things stopped working. See, my concern about is troubleshooting. In our congregation, the solution for that would be to, one of the things I've learned, I've always done systems that had redundancy, but we've talked here about a safety, and I realized that the thing that we'd need for a safety is to be able to say, okay, we've got a laptop. If for some reason I'm not here and whoever is trained on the main system can't get it to work, at least you can put the laptop on the pulpit and run Zoom that way. Unfortunately, due to a variety of reasons, what people are saying now is, okay, well, if we've got the laptop, why don't we just use that and cut out the system that causes all the complexity? And that's where we're stuck at the moment. But I think it's it's a good thing to remember that some of us maybe, we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel here. I am concerned that these systems aren't, they're just not bulletproof turnkey at this point. There are certain computer things that I would trust that with, and not quite with what we're dealing with here. And then you need a safety, and maybe that's just to throw a laptop on the pulpit and do a Zoom Surface one week that way, but you got to be prepared for it.
Yep, I absolutely understand those concerns, and that's why, as an integrator and as a production person, there's a certain level of equipment that I'll use, certain level of equipment that I won't use, because it is not reliable. And if it's not reliable, that's going to affect my work. It's going to affect my reputation. It's going to affect my clients. It's going to affect a lot of things. And if something that you have and you're using in the sanctuary that is not reliable, well, that's going to affect your congregation. It's going to affect your giving. It's going to affect your board's confidence, your clergy's confidence. And, they're not going to be able to concentrate on what they're supposed to concentrate in because something went wrong that wasn't under their control. It's one of the reasons why we, there's a saying that we have, buy once, cry once. And a similar one that is, sometimes the least expensive solution is the most expensive solution, because when it doesn't work, you have to spend money and buy it again and buy it again and buy it again until you finally give up on the cheap solution and you buy the right solution, right? But meanwhile, you've spent all this money on cheap solutions that don't work. But when we talk about control systems and automation, you're right, we have to be really careful that the way we engineer and design them is to be reliable and that there are backups. And as a design engineer, that's something that I'm very conscious of, because things don't always go as planned or as expected, or there can be outside circumstances that influence the way things work, like a power surge, or a light doesn't work, or a cable fails, right? Very common incidences. And we want to take measures to try and ensure that we're using good quality components, that we're protecting ourselves against, catastrophic power surges that can fry equipment like instantly at the worst possible time. Those are things that we want to pay attention to, and just to engineer our equipment and choose equipment that we know that we have confidence in that is going to work for us and not give us those kinds of problems. And with that, I'm going to say we're going to close out this part of the show and thank our panelists and our guests today for a really wonderful conversation. I was, a little bit concerned about how this one was going to go, but I'm glad that we had everybody here, and we had some really good sharing, some really interesting experiences that I'm glad people shared with us, and looking forward to doing better things even more down the road. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank the DVE store for their generous support of our wonderful high definition Zoom client, Zoom account, and for the office hours crew for the use of our Q&A platform, Mukana. So watch the Discord, sign up for that if you haven't already, where you can find show agendas, upcoming topics. You can suggest topics for future shows, and we really do appreciate that. You can communicate with us. We can have ongoing dialogues and Q&As and do some problem solving in the Discord all week long. And there's lots of built-in information. There's stuff that we've built up over the past 32, 33 weeks that is there for you to use. So this is all, for many of us, this is brand new stuff. This whole notion of putting our church, our house of worship, online, available for the world to see, and it's something that we've never done before. So we're all learning, and we're all on the same road, but we're at different places on the journey, and that's all good. That's all good. And some of the point is to help each other and learn from each other and bring each other along, because that's what it's all about. It's all about community. So reinvent your ministry, be bold, bring your clergy and your boards along on this journey with you, and think about what the difference in community potential is. You have your built-in community, but now you have the opportunity to build a much wider community through online worship. So dare to dream about it and make it happen. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. Next week is the Synagogue Tech Forum that happens 4 hours earlier at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and is a different login. So look to the Discord for that information. And they do, they're going to have a guest speaker next week. That'll be very interesting. So we'll see you there. Have a good night.